doesn't pay because, hey, what's going on with you? Let's go. All right. So this Maamar is based on the Maamar of the Alter Rebbe put there this week, where the Alter Rebbe addresses the meaning of the first verse of this week's parsha. It says in the first verse of this week's parsha, a woman who will seed and give birth to a boy. And it sounds like that whenever a woman will seed, whenever a woman is pregnant, she gives birth to a boy. And although that's the bracha that a lot of Sephardic Jews give, you should have you should have 12 boys. And but the Torah isn't so gung-ho about dafka being blessed to have it's just you should pray to God to have a healthy child. But anyways,
I don't know if the Bible says a boy born is simcha, girl born is sorrows.
You have to learn a lot of other Gemaras. Anyways, so the point is, so the point is that it sounds like whenever a woman will see there's an offspring is male, and the question is, it's not true. What does it mean? So the Gemara explains when a woman will seed first, then the offspring is male. And the question, that's what the Gemara says. So the question is, why is that true? Why if a woman seeds first is the offspring male? And what does that have to do with us? So Alter Rebbe explains that the woman and the man refer to Hashem and the Jewish people. That's not just a spiritual meaning of the verse, rather the source of a husband and wife in this world is Hashem and the Jewish people. So what's the reason that if a woman seeds first, if whatever that means for us, on a spiritual level, or briefly discussed yesterday, when we make our own inspiration to come close to Hashem on our own, so then the offspring is male. What does it mean when Hashem inspires us, when the man seeds first, what does it mean that the offspring is female? So briefly, we learned yesterday that if the Eibusher inspires us, so then it doesn't last too long. Versus if you inspire yourself, then it's internal and it's real. Then it's something you have yourself. The offspring is male, indicating that something that says males are more stubborn. They have more of a stronger das. They have more stronger, and therefore the inspiration will last longer. So before coming to that conclusion, the Alter Rebbe brought the explanation of philosophers. Philosophers also tried to figure this out, and they have a whole different explanation. And they're going to see that their explanation also has a spiritual counterpart as well. And the reason why Alter Rebbe brings them, although that's not the conclusion, is because it also has some meaning for us. Their explanation is that when the male seed is on top, so then the dominant seed is the male seed. So if a woman seeds first, so the male seed is on top of the female seed. And because the male seed is on top, therefore it will overwhelm the female seed, and the offspring will be male. That's the Alter says that their explanation is not so. That doesn't sound like that the explanation is correct. And instead, he says the opposite. It's specifically the female seed that causes there to be a male child. In short what the Alter says. Let's go down to the Rebbe's Maamar. This is from Tafshin Chafei, 1965. This Maamar was edited by the Rebbe. Isha, he says, a woman who will see and give birth to a male. When a man seeds first, the offspring is a female. The woman seeds first, the offspring is male. Maybe they've lost in Pirshu that Tamal Zash Ish Mazas Khili Zachar who Kisha Ish Mazas Khila Ish Babachin de la Gava. The philosophers say, why is it that when the woman seeds first, the offspring is male? This is because which philosophers? Good question. I don't know. I don't know. The reason is because when the woman seeds first, so then the male seed is on top, and that is a dominant. Then the male seed is dominant because whatever is higher is dominant. That's what the philosophers say. Why does the Alter Rebbe bring their explanation? And now he bring their explanation, but he prefaces their explanation to his own. This is because What's the source of a man and woman? What's the meaning of man and woman spiritually? This is God and the Jewish people. That Hashem is called the male, the Jewish people are called the female. And it's known about the relationship between our inspiration to come close to Hashem versus Hashem inspiring us. It's known there's an advantage when we inspire ourselves, and there's an advantage when Hashem inspires us. The advantage of us inspiring ourselves is that when what we reach when we inspire ourselves on our own, without hearing any voices from heaven or any being inspired by the being shaken up from on high, when we just try to generate our own connection to Hashem with our own efforts. So what we reach is the divine light that we draw down is from the innermost part of Hashem's light. The advantage of when Hashem inspires us is that we cannot possibly reach the place where Hashem's inspiration comes from. So Hashem sends inspiration to us from a place which we cannot reach. But in that place itself, that divine light that is given to us as a gift, when Hashem wants to inspire us, without our inspiring ourselves, that light may be higher. However, it remains on the periphery of ourselves, doesn't come in, it's not internalized. So the advantage, briefly again, when the Eibishter inspires us, so when Hashem shakes us up, it's a real shake-up. It's a shake-up in a way that we can't possibly shake ourselves up that way. Like think, for example, you see a miracle of the Eibishter, so then it's something which you can't, that kind of inspiration you have from witnessing something which is overtly divine providence, that's a real, like it lifts you up in a way that you can't lift yourself up in the same way. On the other hand, you're wondering, scratching your head, either a day later, or a month later, or a year later, or a decade later, did I even really see what I just saw? Did that even really happen? You ever have that question? It happens to me all the time like that. I'll tell you a story, it happened to me, but I don't believe it. No, it happens to me all the time. You get so inspired because of what you saw, but since it's something the Eibishter gave you, it's not your own, so then it's not something which is internalized in yourself. Versus when you on your own try to, you see some kind of character trait you want to work on, and you take a chapter in Tanya which addresses that character trait. You spend 5 minutes every day, you meditate on this chapter of Tanya, hoping to make something inside you budge. So it may not be as magical and theatrical as in the first analogy, but what's changing is your thought process. You're changing the way you think about things. Come inside. It's Gadi. Is a auto mechir mebachutz bifnim. Shutim v'shama shama. Says zagam mechinam. Okay. Yesh. Look in note 4. Note 4. There. Okay. So I actually, sorry. Before we go to note 4. The reason why the Alter brings the explanation of the philosophers before bringing the explanation of his own. So before we go to note 4, let's just finish the paragraph. So the Rebbe's explanation is like this. Shlema, next page. The Pirush Zachar who Mizera Ish Dilo Gavar, Mishtash Me'amayla Shavus Leila. A Pirush Zachar Mizera Isha Mishtash Me'amayla Shus Sat. The reason why there are 2 explanations about why when the female seeds first is the offspring of male, the reason why there are 2 explanations. One, that the female seed is the source of the male offspring, and the other, that the female seed allows the male seed to be on top, the female seed being there first, and therefore the male seed dominates and the offspring is male. The reason why these 2 explanations is because there are 2 different ways of looking at the divine inspiration. One way of looking at the divine inspiration is that it's less than our inspiration because it's not internalized, doesn't last so long. Another way of looking at it is it's better than our own inspiration because it's a lot more powerful, it's a lot more, it shakes you much more. So because there is an explanation where the Eibishter's inspiration is greater, that's why there's explanation of the philosophers that the male seed is a result of the male. The origin of that explanation is because of the virtue of the divine inspiration. Therefore, the author brings out the explanation that the male offspring is from the male seed, although physically that's not the conclusion. The author brings that explanation because he wants to hint that they have a point. Spiritually, they have a point. The point that spiritually is that the Hashem's inspiration has an advantage that our own inspiration does not have. So again, the Alter Rebbe is bringing two explanations. One of them is not the conclusion. So the reason why the Alter brings the explanation of the philosophers, which is not the conclusion, is because he wants to hint something with this explanation. Their physical analogy is, their physical understanding of the reality, where it says why Hashem created light thunder, so to straighten up the crookedness of men's hearts. So I think there's also an advantage of construction. Every so often I hear that on this part of the shul, that part of the shul. So it straightens up a lot of things, hopefully. So the truth is, the conclusion is begashmius. Why is it that when a woman seeds first, the offspring is male? Is because the woman's seed itself produces the male. That's the reason. But the Alter Rebbe also brings other explanation, which says that it's the male seed that produces a male, and it's a female seed coming first, allows a male seed to be on top to dominate. The Alter brings that explanation to hint that there's something about the male seed that's better than the female seed, which spiritually means it's something about God's inspiration, because God represents the male, or the origin of the male. There's something about Hashem's inspiration, which is better than our own inspiration. And therefore, he also brings explanation to philosophers, although that's not the conclusion, to hint to us that there's something better about Hashem inspiring us and our own inspiration. We should be aware of that.
You said it's not sustainable. So it's, in some sense, it's higher, but it's also not as
right. It has an advantage also. It's important to know that, by the way, because when the Eibush inspires you, you're supposed to hold on to it with something. You're supposed to make a good decision to hold on to it, because you can't recreate that. It's something Hashem is giving you as a gift. So you have to hold on to that inspiration by making some good decision when Hashem sends that to you. Okay, so that's
Hashem inspiration is greater because and see the first, one see the first. I mean, there's Hashem inspiration. What about that changes that?
The offspring being male means that the inspiration is long lasting. It's better. So when the woman sees first, the Torah says the offspring is male. The inspiration is better. Inspiration is better. It's male means better. In this analogy,
the weakness to get the greater.
So the Alter Rebbe says that the reason why the Rebbe says why is Alter bring this explanation that the philosophers that the woman sees first, the offspring is male. It's because the male seeds produces male, which means the inspiration of Hashem produces a better inspiration, because he wants to highlight to us that there is something better about Hashem's inspiration. It's better than our own inspiration. There is something better about that. That's
I understand it. I don't understand.
Give me 30 seconds more, I'll get it to you. The philosophers say that the man produces a man, which spiritually means that when Hashem inspires us, it lasts.
Okay.
So that's not the conclusion.
Okay.
Only when we inspire ourselves does it last.
Okay.
But the author brings another explanation to tell us that we should pay attention to that inspiration because it has an advantage.
Okay.
What is its advantage? Its advantage is something else. Its advantage is that it shakes us up more. So he just brings that explanation so that we should know there's something better about that.
So the male produces
a male. Then Hashem inspires us, rather than the female produces a male. Okay, look at note 4. Or you might want to say, you might want to say that the reason author brings explanation to philosophers is because the Gemara says that sometimes the Mishnah quotes many times actually the opinion of those who the halacha is not like, in order so that someone shouldn't wake up many generations later and say, hey, they said this halacha, but they didn't consider the opposite opinion. They didn't consider another way of looking at it. So the Mishnah brings many times other opinions, which is not the halacha, So that we should know that the Mishnah considered both opinions and yet ruled one over the other. So maybe the Alter Rebbe brings the explanation of the philosophers because he wants us to be aware that he knows the other explanation and he considered them both and he knew and he said this is right, this is wrong. Maybe that's why Alter brought that explanation. That's what you might want to answer. First of all, that's not the way Chassidus works. Yes, that's true that in Gemara and Shulchan Aruch and that system is used, but that's not the way Chassidus usually works. The Zohar says about itself, for example, last Haman Lekushya, the Zohar has no questions, does no arguments. In general, the whole system of Torah revelation, the inner dimension of Torah works differently than the way things are in Nigla. There's the whole idea of the inner dimension of Torah is revelation of God's oneness, and therefore the Zohar says there's no argument in the inner dimension of Torah. Now there is argument, but it's not as hard and fast as things are in the real parts of Torah. As Alter Rebbe writes in the introduction of Tanya, Alter Rebbe says there are many opinions. Alter Rebbe says about things in halacha. How much more so are there so many different ways of looking at your connection to Hashem on a personal level. So there is there's no clear, the lines aren't as clear. So that explanation doesn't satisfy us because that's not what Chassidus usually does. Chassidus doesn't usually bring in other explanations just to disprove them. Number one. Besides that, another reason why we can't consider that as explanation of why the Alter Rebbe brings explanation of the philosophers is as follows. What's the difference between both explanations? The Pirsha philosophy according to the philosophers, whoever seeds first is in order that what they do is they give strength to the following seed. In other words, the dominant seed is going to be the one on top. So the role of the first seed is to enable the second seed to dominate. That's what the philosophers are saying. According to Alter Rebbe, the virtue is in the first seed itself. Whoever seed is first dominates. According to Alter Rebbe, the male seed, if it's first, it dominates, and the offspring is female because the male seed produces a female. And if the female seed is first, the offspring is male because whoever seed is first dominates. So according to philosophers, whoever seed is second dominates, and the role of the first seed is just to enable the second seed to be on top to dominate. According to Alter Rebbe, whoever seed is first dominates. From this Maamar itself, where the Alter Rebbe concludes like the second explanation, and the second explanation again is that whoever's seed is first is what dominates. Muchach, according to this explanation of Alter Rebbe, it's clear. So if the Alter Rebbe's whole point is to prove that the first seed is dominant intrinsically, not because it enables us to strengthen the second seed, but the first seed itself is dominant. So then look at now let's go 20,000 feet up and look at the Alter Rebbe's Maamar from that vantage point. So now we have two explanations. We have the explanation of the philosophers and the explanation of Alter Rebbe. Which explanation is first? The explanation of the philosophers is first. Can you say the explanation of the philosophers is merely in order to strengthen the Alter Rebbe's explanation? Can you say that explanation is just there to give power to the second explanation, to prove that the second explanation considered the first explanation and it disagreed with it so that you should know the second explanation is really conclusive? Can you say that? The Alter Rebbe's whole point is to prove to you that the first seed is dominant, and therefore transferring that to the Alter Rebbe's own Maamar, you have to say that the first explanation has a virtue over the second explanation. You get it?
Yeah, it's nice. But yeah.
You get it? You don't get it, Dr. Messer?
Who came first?
The whole trying to prove that the first thing is better, whatever's first is better. So look at Alter Rebbe's Maamar itself. You can't say the first. The Gemara says that you bring some kind of explanation first because you want to negate it. So you can't say the purpose of that the Alter Rebbe is doing the same thing in the very same Maamar where he's saying that that's not how it works. Whoever is first has an advantage, and therefore we must say the explanation of the philosophers has an advantage. I think that's very cool, by the way. Yeah. Right.
This is like assuming that who comes
Quantum
first
physics is
has
a good introduction.
anything
What?
to do with it. This is like assuming who comes first had anything to do with it. I mean, why would we know that who comes first has anything to do? Well,
Oh, bah.
what is this? How do we know that who came first has anything to do with which sex the baby is?
Yeah.
The Gemara says so.
Okay.
The Gemara says if a female seeds first, the offspring is male. If the male seeds first, the offspring is female. Okay, we'll stop here. Where's the shkoyach?
Gemara, so here's the point that we got after this.
The funny part is, this has been studied in medicine for a long time.